All of us, no matter where we are at in our journey of faith, whether it's as non-believers or new believers or longtime believers, maybe we are believers in different religions, or maybe we're believers in no religion. No matter where you are at in your walk, in your life, you have an image of who God is, the Judeo-Christian God. You have an image of who he is, of how relatable he is, of how approachable he is. You have this picture in your mind of what he is like based on things that you've heard or seen in the media or read or even gleaned from scripture or conversations that you've had with others. And you have this idea of who God is and what he's like. No matter where you're at, all of us do. So I just first think of that image that you have of God. Think of just that picture of God in your mind. Maybe it's what he looks like. Maybe that's what you're picturing right now. But I'm not just talking about what he looks like. I'm talking about like his character traits, what he's like. And don't just give the Sunday school answers here. Don't just give what you know that you should be saying about God, but really search yourself and ask, well, what is my view of God? How do I see him and how approachable he is? Do I see him as just this great and powerful and mighty being that's distant and far off, or can strike you down with a lightning bolt when you do something wrong? Is that how you view him? Do you see him as holy and set apart and respectable and worthy of respect? Do you see him as this loving, merciful, kind person, being, this forgiving like this, the goodness of God? Do you see, is that how you see him? Or do you see him as angry and wrathful? I don't know how you see him, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. I just want you to think, how do I view God? How do I view, no matter what I believe about whether he exists or not, what do I believe about him based on what I've learned so far, based on what I've heard from others? There's two main attributes of God that we typically look at. We call them in the theological terms as the transcendence and the immanence of God, but in the simple terms and the more understandable term that I use is the greatness of God and the goodness of God. And you got this when you were a kid saying your grace before your meals, right? We got this right at the beginning of the prayer. God is great, God is good, let us thank him for this food, right? And we continued on with the prayer. But we got that right from the start, that God is great and God is good. Yet, quite often, we separate those two so much so that no matter where you are in your journey again, no matter where you are in your life, you will gravitate towards one of those two attributes of God, for better or for worse. You will gravitate towards the greatness of God, where it can be this holy reverence of him as this amazing, powerful, just being, or this big bully in the sky. But either way, he's powerful and he's God, and he seems unapproachable to you. And that could be in a good way unapproachable in that he's just so powerful, or a bad way that he's unapproachable in that he's just so distant and not compassionate towards us, that bully in the sky mentality. Then there's the goodness of God over here that we see, and again, we separate sometimes, and we gravitate towards that goodness of God, and we see God as, well, hey, if God's good, then he would, that nobody's going to die, nobody's going to hell, there's nothing of the sort. This is, all of us are forgiven, and Jesus loves everyone. You don't even have to believe, really. It's just everyone, it's all good. And so there's the extreme view of that goodness. But greatness and goodness are not a spectrum in themselves, or a way of measurement between the two of where you stand. although we often gravitate towards one or the other. But maybe within themselves, there can be ways that we can scale where we believe, like in terms of the goodness and the greatness of God. But the two of them actually have to be reconciled together and cannot be separated from each other. God's greatness and his goodness have to be so tied together and locked in that we can't separate them from the other. The greatness of God and the goodness of God are one, and they're together. Now, what does that mean? What does that have to do with anything? Well, what I'm talking about today is how approachable is God. Do you feel that you can approach God, that you can come before Jesus and speak to him? And in what manner can you speak to him? If we have one view further, one way or the other, the greatness of God can sometimes set us on this path of that God is unapproachable and that we can't approach him. And then there's the other side where God's he's your buddy, he's your friend, he's your brother, he's like a father, but like this really loving, cool dad that let you, drink beer at the friend's house and stuff and whatever, like that's the cool dad. And so we look at Jesus or God kind of in those terms, and those two images of God, this either really great or really good God, help us determine how approachable God is. Today I want to talk about that, the approachability of God, and whether you're a believer or not a believer, or just not sure where you stand or what God's like. I hope that today, as we unpack what this means about God's approachability, that it will help you to be able to have that conversation with him, that he can reveal himself to you in a more relatable way. Going back in the days of Jesus and before Jesus, the God of Israel really only kind of revealed himself to the people of Israel. Now he may have revealed himself in other ways to other nations, and we see that throughout the Old Testament, that God had revealed himself. But the chosen people of Israel, those were God's people. These were the children of God, and that's how they viewed themselves. That's how God viewed them. And they were supposed to be this group set apart from the way the world was. The world could do what the world does, the fallenness of the world. We've talked about that in earlier sermons, but you can go look at the earlier sermons in Mark and get more understanding about the fall and where we're at now. But the world would go on and they would do what the world wanted to do, trying to determine right from wrong for themselves. That's what it was. But the chosen people of God, the Israelites, they were supposed to be following this the law, which helped them determine and understand what God said was right versus what was wrong. The law was set in place to help them be set apart from the way the world determined things, and that they were then to trust what God said was right and what was wrong. So that's why they were God's chosen people. And even in his ministry was to come and minister to God's chosen people first. Not that the rest of the world didn't matter, because we know in John 3:16 that God so loved the world, the whole world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will, if they believe, will be saved. And then he says also in Matthew chapter 28 at the end, he says, go and make disciples of all nations. Go make disciples of all nations, not just the Jewish nation, not just the Israelites anymore, not just the nation of Israel and Judah, but to go and to make disciples of all nations. Yet, Jesus' ministry, to start, began with the children of God. This is crucial for the chapter that we're in right now, in chapter 7. We're in chapter 7 of Mark, and in there we just finished talking about in Mark chapter 7 of Jesus and the defiled hands, right? And whatever we put into our body isn't what defiles us, but what comes out of our body is what defiles us. This is crucial because he's not just talking about food laws here, in fact, or hand washing laws, but he's also talking about just anything that the Jews would have then deemed clean or unclean, based on what they understood the law to be. But Jesus opens their minds up to say, hey, this message is for the world, not just for those who seem to be clean, but he's deeming all foods clean and then thus all people clean. That all have the opportunity to be saved by the grace of God. So after Jesus has this discussion with these Pharisees and his disciples about the defiled hands and everything, which we talked about in our last Mark sermon, we're in Mark chapter 7, verse 24. And here Jesus is actually entering a different region that's outside of the Israelite towns. This is ministering now a region in where the Gentiles would be. The Gentiles were just non-Jewish people. They were pagans. Quite often in that area they would have been Greeks. But this town that he's entering, we see is definitely just kind of outside of where the majority of the Jews would have resided. There probably were some Jews who resided there, but the majority of the Jews would not have been there. And so it says in verse 24, from there he arose, so from that whole conversation about the defiled hands, he arose and he went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. Why didn't he want people to know? There's a lot of speculation here. It could be just Jesus was tired. His ministry was to the Jews at that time, so he thought, hey, let's take a vacation in Tyre and Sidon and get some rest here maybe. That could have been it. However, he just didn't want people to know about his presence there at that time. But it didn't matter. He couldn't be hidden. The next verse says in verse 25, but immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Then it tells us who this woman is. It says, now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth. So Syrophoenician, so she was from Syria and Phoenicia, the descent. And she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. But she answered him, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And he said to her, for this statement you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter. And she went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. This story, as I was preparing for this, I was like, I don't even know what it is why Jesus would respond in that way. It's so hard for us to grasp in today's age of how just demeaning of a statement that seems to be. Dogs weren't a really good, they're not like how we treat our dogs these days. Like, we love our dogs. A lot of people let their dogs sleep in bed with them. They treat their dogs like they're part of the family and everything. I've got two beautiful dogs, and that's how it feels with us. And so for us to use this term dog in such a derogatory sense, or to understand why Jesus would refer to them as dogs, when we love dogs, what's wrong with dogs? But back then, they didn't have that same kind of status. They may have been pets, but they certainly were not in the same kind of status that we hold them today. And so dogs were just, they were the ones who were there to eat the scraps. That was it. They were not shown the same love and reverence and attention that we show them today. So when he says, let the children be fed first, It's not right for it's not right to take children's bread and throw it to the dogs. He is clearly making a distinction here between his ministry to the Israelites and the ministry to the Gentiles. Now, he doesn't say that his ministry will never be to the Gentiles. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say the dogs shouldn't be fed. He's just saying that the Israelites should be fed first. At first glance for me, this seems just so completely rude and insensitive of Jesus to say to this woman when she's desperately coming to him for help. Now, what we see here is how this woman is actually approaching Jesus. Because a lot of us might take offense to what Jesus said to us, but this woman doesn't seem to. She doesn't seem to be as offended by Jesus' remarks as I am on her behalf. I think I'm more offended for her than she is by him. And the reason is they knew the Jewish laws for those living around. They knew that the Jews considered them to be unclean. They knew the Jews considered them to be unrighteous. These dirty people that were not of God. And so she knew that was the view that Jews had of her. And for her now to boldly, as a woman and as a Gentile, and being unclean, she now comes to this holy teacher of the law, this rabbi, and falls to his feet to talk to him and to beg him to do something for her. This is so unheard of. The difference here, I think the reason why we see her do this is because there's a kid involved. If this was maybe for herself or anyone else, maybe not so much. But we see her running because this is affecting her daughter. What mother would not do everything that she can to make sure her daughter's taken care of, her child's taken care of? So she charges in. There's a couple ways that we can see how she approaches Jesus. And this is how we ought to be able to approach Jesus. All of us should be approaching Jesus with both reverence and confidence. Reverence and confidence. Our approach to Jesus must be with a complete reverence and respect for who he is and recognition of who he is and who we are in light of him, and also confidence in knowing who we are in light of him. So when I'm talking about approaching Jesus in this reverence, that kind of is going back to this idea of the greatness of God, the goodness, the transcendence and the greatness of who God is. Above all things, he transcends all things. And he's powerful, and he's mighty, and he's seemingly unapproachable. And we ought to be humbled in his presence. Think of in Isaiah chapter 6. And if you've never read that, go read that right now. Isaiah chapter 6, where Isaiah stands before God's presence. And he's just so in awe that he falls down at the foot of the throne of God. And so here we see the woman doing the same thing. It says that she came and fell down at his feet in verse 27, that she fell down at his feet. There is this reverence, and she's begging him, but there's this reverence that she has of him, recognizing his greatness. A lot of us, in the response to what Jesus said to us, that we are just dogs, that let the children be fed first and the dogs later, we would take offense to that and say, well, who do you think you are calling me a dog? Don't you know who I am? Don't you know what I've done? I'm a good person. A lot of us would get our back up, say, why would you separate me from anyone else? Like, I'm good. Don't you know who I am? Don't you know who my kids are? Don't you know who my parents are? Like I'm a good person. I do good things. And you can't talk to me like that. That's how a lot of us would have that approach. A lot of us do have that approach. When we think of God and we think of Jesus and how we think of this idea that we have to actually change and be transformed. What you're saying, I'm not good enough, that I have to actually clean up my act, but that I'm bad inherently, like there's something wrong with me. And we get our backs up, we get defensive. And we see God as that bully in the sky that just is constantly reminding us that we're just never going to be good enough. And that's not it. But this woman, what she does is she recognizes he's God. I'm not. He decides what's right and wrong. I don't. And so she says, yeah, you know what? You're right. I know your mission. I know I'm not a Jew. I know I'm an unclean Gentile, pagan. I've worshiped other gods. I've worshiped other idols, whatever it is. She knows that she is not worthy, that she should not be standing in his presence. She, like Isaiah, could have that same response of, woe is me. That is her response. Jesus says, you're a dog. And she says, yeah, you're right. You're a sinner. And she says, yeah, you're right. That's how she approaches him. She doesn't try to impose her rights. Nowadays, we so try to impose our rights. I mean, think of this entire pandemic. It's continued just trying to impose what we think our rights, our privileges. This is we need to stand up for those things. And she's just like, yeah, you know what? You're God, I'm not. You're Lord, I'm not. And so her first response is in reverence and acknowledgement to the greatness of who God is. She humbles herself before him, falling at his feet, and then responding to his comment about who she is in this order of his ministry. Not that Jesus will never minister to the Gentiles, but that just not yet. And she's saying, yes, I get it. I understand that you have a plan here. Yet, she has a confidence in her as well. A confidence to approach Jesus in the first place. A confidence to be begging of Jesus in the first place. That she would rush up as a woman, as a Gentile, as unclean to this rabbi, holy and set apart, this teacher, this Son of God, that she would run to him, falling at his feet in that reverence, yet with such confidence, is completely unheard of for that time. And she comes to him in this confidence for her child's sake, but because she knows the person she's approaching is a good person. She knows that he is approachable. She's getting something that even the Jews, the Pharisees, the disciples, they didn't even really get. And she's coming not just with that reverence, she has that reverence, but also with this confidence that she knows this is a good man and he's doing good things. She recognized that Jesus was doing something amazing in this world that nobody else was catching on to yet. And so she says to him, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. She's saying, look, I know your ministry is to the Jews first. I get it. You want to meet with the people of Israel first and minister to them. They're the ones who know your prophecies. They're the ones who know your texts. They're the ones who know your word and your truth. And they know that you're the Messiah. You're cut from their cloth. You're part of their family. I get it. I get that. But I know you're here for something bigger. And if I could just get just even a smidge of that. I know that it's not coming to full completion yet, but if I could just get just a bit, the crumbs under the table. Because even the dogs eat crumbs under the table. If you're calling me a dog, I get it. I agree with you. You know what? I am not worthy to be in your presence. And yet, even the dogs eat crumbs from the table that the children drop. Can I just eat a crumb? as a dog. She approaches Jesus in this reverence and in this confidence. She's acknowledging the fact that, yeah, you know what? I'm not worthy. I am a sinner. And yet I know he loves me. Yeah, I know that even though he's great, he's also good. I know that even though he's above all things, he came down to be with us. And she got this in this simple little story. Despite Jesus' snide remark to her, this appearing insult that he has, she still sees through it and says, no, I know. And maybe Jesus was testing her in that moment. I think that his heart would certainly not be hardened against the Gentiles, but it's that he was saying, look, no, there's a plan here. I got to fulfill the prophecies here, and I need to minister to the Jews first and then to the Gentiles. She's not denying Jesus' ministry plan. She's not denying God's plan for the redemption of the world. She just realizes that, hey, even the dogs eat the crumbs. She's not saying, and this is from Timothy Keller. He quotes this, and I just love the way he worded it, so I just wrote it exactly instead of trying to paraphrase. But he says, she's not saying, Lord, give me what I deserve on the basis of my goodness, which a lot of us would do, right? Hey, I'm a good person. Like, why wouldn't you do this for me? You're saying just because I'm not a Jew that I'm not gonna get the bread here, that my child can't be healed just because I'm not part of the family? She didn't come with that kind of arrogance or pride. Instead she comes and she says, give me what I don't deserve on the basis of your goodness, and I need it now. Give me what I don't deserve. I know I don't deserve this. I know that you are God, you're above all things, but I know that you're good. So not because of my goodness, but because of your goodness. Not because I deserve it, but because I know that you're good, loving, and you care about me. This is the God that we serve. No matter, earlier I was talking about the image that you might have of God. No matter what image you have of God, you have to reconcile the greatness and the goodness with each other. That they have to be interlocked and they can't break apart. And when we see that, the greatness and the goodness of God, we see how approachable Jesus is. And we can approach Jesus with reverence and with confidence, knowing that, yes, he is above all things. He's transcendent. He's great, but he's good. He's loving. He's merciful. He's forgiving. He's gracious. This is the God we serve. Jesus' response to her was this, and then I'll close. He says, for this statement, you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter. And she went home and found the child lying in bed, and the demon was gone. Jesus came through. He answered her request. He answered her prayer because of her approach, because of her response. Her response was of humility. Her response was of reverence and respect. Yet her response was still confident and bold because she knew of his goodness. She knew she didn't deserve it, but she knew that he was good, loving, and kind. And so she asked it anyway. This week, considering what your current view of God is and considering what you just heard, can you take some time to actually pray that God would reveal to you his greatness and his goodness, that you can come to him with that reverence and that confidence, knowing that he loves you deeply and that he wants to take care of you. And he wants you to know just how much you are loved and cherished by him. I'm praying that as you connect with him, reconciling his goodness with his greatness, and that they won't be able to be separated, that your walk with him will be enhanced and enlightened. He'll continue to reveal himself to you, and you'll learn what it means to actually abide in him and bask in that greatness and that goodness. God bless your week, and we'll see you whenever.